One of the things that we get asked a lot of questions about is leasing of vehicles. And when you come in to get a new vehicle, there's three ways that you can purchase them. One is to write a check for the entire amount. One is to do a conventional loan. And the third option is leasing. And we typically get more questions on leasing because people are less familiar with it. And one of the ways that leasing is an effective tool is typically your monthly payments are quite a bit more affordable. Due to it being a shorter transaction period, typically 24 to 42 months, it just shortens up the amount of time. Therefore, the payments can be a little bit more affordable. A number of people would maybe look at it and say if they were looking at a Jeep Cherokee, but they were hoping to get a little bit more room in a Grand Cherokee, well, they might be able to lease a Grand Cherokee for the same thing that they could have purchased a Cherokee. And so you might be able to get more money or more vehicle for your monthly payment. Another great option is if you're somebody that's just starting out, never had a car loan before. Typically, due to the fact that they're a shorter loan and things of that nature, it's easier to get financed on a lease versus a purchase as well. The other great part is you really do control what your expenses are. When you're leasing a vehicle, typically it's a 36-month lease. Average number of miles would be about 12,000 a year, or basically 1,000 a month. So if you lease a vehicle for 3 years, you're going to have that vehicle under its peak performance time when it's covered under a full factory warranty. So you've got your affordable monthly payment, you pay insurance on it, you pay your basic maintenance on it, and then of course you're putting gas in the vehicle. So you know pretty much on a monthly basis what your expenses are going to be there. If you finance a vehicle, finance it for 60, 72, sometimes even 84 months, all of a sudden you get after that factory warranty is over, and then things come in. You've got to buy tires, you have anything that might be mechanical breakdowns, the things of those natures that then you don't have necessarily the control of your cost. So a lot of different great reasons to take a look at leasing. We present it every time here at the dealership. It's just another option to finance your new vehicle. So a lot of times we'll give somebody what their conventional payment would be. We'll also show what the lease payment would be, and they'll see that it's quite a bit lower, and they'll say, hey, tell me more about that lease, and we do that. And basically it's all up front. There's no surprises with it. You know what your monthly payment is going in, you know what is total due at signing when you come to sign the paperwork. And then at the end of the lease, there's a guaranteed future value. It's a percentage of the full MSRP of the vehicle that you're looking at. And at the end of a lease, you have the option to either buy the vehicle for that amount of money. If there's some equity in it, you could sell it to a friend or on your own, or trade it in and have some equity as well. Or if it's not worth as much as that lease end value, you can just turn it back into the dealership. So all of that stuff's up front. It's a very common thing. Typically 35% of customers lease new vehicles, and so it's a very high percentage, and we certainly fall into that range here at the dealership. And it's not something we push, it's just something that we present. We give the customer the option, and a lot of times it makes sense for them. If you do put a few more miles than the average on, how does that work when it comes to leasing? And it can be factored in. Whether you're buying a vehicle or whether you're leasing a vehicle, it's kind of the same thing. If you put more miles on than the average customer on a conventional loan, your vehicle's going to depreciate a little bit faster. Well, on a lease, what you're doing is you're paying to use a certain amount of miles from 0 to, say, typically 36,000 miles. Well, if you need a few more miles, say 15,000 years, you can even go up to 30,000 miles a year. All we do is we figure that in. Certainly it does raise the payment a little bit, but either way, whether you're purchasing or leasing a vehicle, the more miles you put on, the more you're going to depreciate that vehicle. So it can work in both senses. Also, there's some people that have business reasons they can write their lease payments off, and especially in that scenario where they're putting more miles on, it really actually can be a very advantageous situation for them. So it is something that can work if you put more miles on. It's just something we look at on an individual basis and determine if it's the right thing, and it usually shows whether it's a good idea for the customer or not. It's really simple. A lot of times if you're looking, I use the example of an F-150 earlier. You know, if you looked at a conventional payment on a Jeep Cherokee, it's probably about $500 a month. But if you look at what a lease on a Jeep Cherokee is, with $2,500 cash or trade equity down, it's about $250 a month. Well, usually a customer will say, I don't have any interest in leasing, and then they find out their payment's $500. Then they go, well, tell me more about that $250 payment for leasing it. And really, we'll just answer their questions, and we'll determine if it's the right thing for them. A lot of times it is, sometimes it's not. And we just want to make sure that the customer's informed, knows everything there is to know about the lease, ask any questions that they have, and we'll give a good straight answer to anything there and make sure that they're informed about it, and then they've got what they need to make the right decision for themselves. Another area where leasing can be advantageous is since it's a shorter term note, if you are, say, looking to put a down payment, $1,000, $2,000 down, since it's a 36-month typically agreement versus a 60 or 72 on a conventional payment, a $1,000 down payment will have a much bigger impact on a lease than it would a conventional loan. So, you know, a couple $1,000s can really lower a monthly payment down on a lease too. So it can have a greater impact. The only trick to that is you lease it, you have a nice down payment, you come back in 3 years later and say, hey, I love it, I want to do the same thing. You probably have a similar payment if you have a similar down payment again. So you'd want to save a little bit of money in between during that lease cycle so that you do have another nice down payment. Ford and Chrysler, typically, when you come back in at the end of your lease, they have some lease loyalty rebates and things. So a lot of times anywhere from $500 to $1,500 if you, say, go from one Ford to another Ford or a Jeep to another Jeep. You know, there's a lot of times incentives there that keep you in there. So it almost kind of becomes a managed trade cycle where every 3 years you're getting a different vehicle. You really avoid any major maintenance costs, things like that. It's just kind of a planned trade cycle. Everything's above board and upfront. So if you look at a $60,000 F-150 and after 3 years they say it's going to be worth 60% of the full MSRP, 60,000 times 60%, $36,000. So that's what your guaranteed future value is. That's what Ford is saying that thing is going to be worth. If it's worth $38,000 worth it, you might be able to trade it in and have $2,000 in equity. If it's something your brother wants to buy it for $38,000, well, you might be able to sell it to him and make a couple $1,000s. Worst case scenario, it's not worth, and there is one, are you rolling right now? Yeah. Okay. There is one part I'll throw in here in just a sec, but pardon me. But then the other part is, so say it's worth $33,000. Well, you have the option to turn it back in and walk away from it. But when they first started leasing, they would say the base value is that $36,000, but it was open-ended. So if all of a sudden it was only worth $30,000, at the end of the lease, they came back to you and said, hey, Jaden, we need a check for $6,000. It was awful. It was horribly unethical, and it was called an open-end lease, and the government quickly shut that down, and they should have. It's one of the things that gave car dealers an absolutely horrible reputation, and understandably so. It was an awful scenario. So any lease at any dealership now, they are all closed-ended upfront. You know what that guaranteed future value is, and then you have the options based on that. One of the great things about a lease is your options at the end of the lease. It's all based on that guaranteed future value that is established, the percentage of the MSRP of the vehicle. And, you have three options there at the end. The first is you can buy the vehicle out. If it's worth that or more, you love the vehicle. The theory is who better to buy a used car from than yourself? You know how it's been taken care of, how it's been maintained. And if you love the vehicle, great, you have the option to buy it out. If there's equity there, you can trade it in or sell it to somebody else, make a little bit of money that way. And then probably the worst case scenario is if, hey, it's been a good vehicle, but you want to go a different direction, turn it in, hand the keys into the dealership, and you walk away and you're able to go get a different vehicle, whatever you want to do. So I think the options at the end of a lease are one of the best things about it. Obviously, everybody loves the monthly payment savings during the course of the lease, but that freedom in the middle of it or at the end of it is really, I think, an important part we probably don't talk about enough.